It has always been a part of you from the very first beat of your heart. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. Grab a cup of tea and sit down by the fire. This is the second episode in our series on cozy horror.
Okay, listeners, so I will be kicking us off this evening. Well, it's evening for us. I don't know when you're listening, but I will be kicking us off. And today, in our second episode on cozy horror, but our first episode talking about a specific work of cozy horror, we are talking about Patrick Horvath's Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, an IDW comic. And I believe we read the collection. So it's the volume, not just a couple issues. It's a complete story. And I guess I'll talk just a little bit about the plot and the general kind of take on the story, and then perhaps get my impressions a little bit, and then I'll throw it to Matt and Lisa for their impressions before we get into a discussion. So I'm pretty sure I saw this on like Bookstagram. I kind of had an idea about it. I might have even heard it mentioned in a podcast. So I knew it existed, but it was not like on my radar, I guess. I knew it was there, but I didn't know much about what it was. And so Lisa put me onto this. She sent me a copy. It was saying that she thought that I would enjoy this. And I have to say I did. It's a it's a clever kind of mishmash of cozy town full of animal inhabitants. Um, Animals who, as I was reading it, kind of confused me because like you could have like a dog police officer who had a canine companion who was not like the intelligent walking upright on two legs dog police officer, but I just went with it because there are no towns like this, so it's fiction. But yeah, it's very much just like what critics have said. Dexter meets Richard Scarry. So you have the creatures that live in the town. If you're thinking of like, cars and trucks and things that go, and busy town and these sorts of things. But there's a serial killer. So that's, I think, the best way to explain or describe this. And it's still cozy, I think, partially because of the small town vibe, but also because we kind of go through this journey with our main character, who is the Dexter type character or the serial killer character. So just a brief premise. We're in this small town. It's near a big city. And basically there's a brown bear named Samantha Strong who runs a hardware store. And basically Samantha is a serial killer, and she goes to the big city like once a month or so and finds a victim there and murders this person or this animal, this character, and dismembers them and buries them in paint cans under the ground. And so there's not much evidence in the town where Samantha lives because Samantha tries to keep everything outside the town so that the town remains this kind of little cozy neighborhood where Samantha has grown up and lives. But the kind of plot twist, I guess, is that even though Samantha has tried really hard to keep the murder out of this small town, something changes. Either someone in the town starts killing people, or someone comes into the town and starts killing people because there's murders happening, these really grisly murders. And Samantha needs to solve the mystery. So we also have a cozy mystery here of who is doing this, because our friendly serial killer is worried that this is going to cast suspicion their way. So that's kind of the premise of the plot. And so my impressions, I've already given them a little bit. It's kind of it's interesting to me how there can be like the kind of violence aspects in it, but it's still adorable, I guess, because of the creatures in the town. And I like the small town feel, the hardware store, the coffee shop, the characters that we see over and over again that we really get to like. And then some of them, unfortunately, are thought of as possible murderers or are victims. Um, and so I think it's kind of the best of both worlds in a way. Um, and it's kind of like a cozy horror, almost cozy mystery mashup, I think. Which is maybe, why I enjoyed it as much as I did. And perhaps Lisa, that's partially why you passed it my way. But yeah, I think those are my first impressions. I definitely see that it fits in this category and it had a lot of stuff in it to recommend it to a reader like me. So, with that said, Lisa, Matt, I don't know, Lisa, if you want to join in since you were the one who put me onto this, but what were your first impressions, guys?
Um, my first impression was as soon as I heard this existed, I knew I had to own it. I don't know if I've ever, like, ever bought something so quickly as I did this because, um, just the idea of having, this cute little town full of animals where grisly murders are happening, I knew I had to have it. I grew up, of course, I'm a child of, like, the '80s and '90s. I grew up on Berenstain Bear books. I grew up with those calico critters, the little toys that you can buy, like a little rabbit family or a little chipmunk family or a little bear family, and then you can get this little, like, dollhouse, and they have their little tiny beds and their tiny bookshelves, and I mean, it really is the epitome of cozy, like, those things. I always wanted to live in a tree house the way, like, the Berenstain Bears did. Um, it was adorable, and I haven't gotten over that as I've gotten older. I still kind of wanna live, like, in a cottage in the woods, where nobody's gonna bother me. There's just something quaint about that, but this is kind of a little tangent, but I think it gives a good, like, insight into this. For a while, I had followed this account on TikTok called Sylvanian Drama, where this creator was taking, like, the Calico Critters families, the little toys, and basically making a soap opera out of them. Um, so it was like, I mean, just this, like, I mean, it was a satire, obviously, but it was funny to watch, and I got kind of a kick out of seeing these really adorable, cute little, animal toys doing things like, um, sleeping with each other's husbands and getting drunk and behaving badly in public, and I don't know, it was funny to me, and apparently, it got so big, this TikTok account, that, the company, Sylvanian Families, who owns the Calico Critters, like, sued them, like, they got embroiled in a lawsuit, trying to, and I think got the account completely shut down. So yeah, this has always been kind of right in my weird little wheelhouse. But yeah, I love it. I love this was exactly what I thought it was going to be when I read it, and it was exactly it was what I thought it would be. It was what I wanted it to be. Um, yeah, it was an adorable little town with cute little animals, and they were doing horrible things. And kind of, I'm also a fan of Dexter, and one of the things that I like about it is it doesn't shy away from like the gore. So you still see the effects of the violence, which I enjoy, as a horror lover. Um, but also still manages for me to um care for the person doing it. And Mel, I don't want to go into it too deeply right now. But you had mentioned that this is a town where like a dog who is a sheriff might have like a canine dog at its side. And I think there's an interesting theme in the book, or in the comics of the anthropomorphized animals versus the real world animals that are also in the book. There's kind of a cool juxtaposition there, and I don't want to go into it too deeply right now because I want to hear Matt's take on it. But yeah, I think it's not a spoiler at all to say that I'm completely obsessed with this book. I love it so much.
Well, I guess it's time for my take, and I can't help but agree with both of you. I mean, I enjoyed the heck out of this book, and I mean, I say book, but like Mel said, if you are looking for it on Amazon or elsewhere, it was published serially as a comic book and then collected as a full volume. So what we read was the trade paperback, the full collected volume. So we may slip and just refer to it as a book because it is one overarching plot. It's not episodic in that way. But yeah, like Mel, I was turned on to this by Lisa. She recommended it and said, hey, there's this thing that is amazing, and I want to incorporate it into the next season of the podcast. And yeah, as soon as I looked it up, I was like, and purchase, because I think like both of you, this is hits that perfect intersection for me. I also, child of the early 80s, grew up on the Berenstain Bears, like to the point where my dad would sometimes refer to my younger brother as Brother Bear. Like we loved them growing up. And I think Mel also mentioned the Richard Scarry overlap. For those of you who may not be as familiar with him, I have two older brothers who were born in the late 70s, and so I also grew up reading the Richard Scarry books that they had accumulated when they were young. And not that had a huge age gap, but I mean, I remember reading those dog-eared old books over and over as a kid, and I kept a lot of them and ended up reading the same ones to my daughter when she was little, because it was, like Lisa said, it's this very cozy feeling. It's kind of this, nice, warm nostalgia. And reading this comic brings back a lot of that, but also will have some shockingly, brutally graphic murders here and there, which is just, for someone who's twisted and loves horror like me, that's a perfect intersection. Something that evokes some sort of childhood nostalgia while also really leaning into horror. Yes, sign me up. I'm always here for it. And I mean, that was my initial reaction just on hearing it, and then as I read it, nothing changed. If anything, it just a deeper appreciation for it. I I won't delve too much into this as in the initial impressions, but I mean, I do have some thoughts on the story. That there's a lot of overlap and similarities between it and some other stories, but um, I don't find them to be enough to really ding this very hard. I mean, yes, the plot may be a little derivative at times, but the idea itself is so novel and it's so well executed that in my mind really overshadows some of the plot points where it's like, okay, I've kind of seen this before in other places. doesn't matter. In my book, it really does just like overshadow all of that with the wow, this is happening in a storybook land, and I love that. I want to see more things like this now. I want this to be a genre.
Saying it's like storybook land, it reminds me. I've only read a couple volumes of. I haven't read the entire series of Fables, but that series where it places fairy tale characters in real life and what it would be like if that was the case. I could see some similarities. I mean, this is doing something. I'm not saying that they're doing the same thing, no way, but that feel of like a storybook, but reality, I think is definitely something that's going on here. We definitely need to talk about the difference between the anthropomorphized animals and the wild animals, which I know you mentioned, Lisa, but I wanted to mention a couple of the things about the setting that I thought were really interesting. Like, I like the organizational principle of this, where with every issue that moves the story along, we get the local newspaper. And you can't read all the stories, but you get like the headlines. And so, again, it's just building this world where we see like the small town newspaper grappling with the fear of the residents as more people are dying. We get the town hall where everybody's scared. We get the buildup of suspicion. At the very beginning, it's described as like a cozy town with, it's a special place that appreciates lemonade in the summer and spice cider in the fall. I mean, the atmosphere to me, the setup of the atmosphere and the small town feel just seems perfect. And then as it goes on and people are suspicious of other people, that seems perfect as well, because we all know kind of the dark side of small towns. But I also like the way the scenes at the hardware store at the very beginning give us basically, if you've read the whole thing and you go back and look at it, it's your cast of characters. Um, it's obviously it's Samantha and her store, but it's also almost every character that's in the beginning scene, except for maybe one or two, play a role later. So the whole thing is set up from the very beginning. And they're all getting ready for a parade, of course, because it's this small town. Um, so those touches of creating this place that seems like it's set apart from the big city and the woods where the more violent things happen. Violent things are possible in the small town too. There is still there, it's still possible. There can be some like, it seems like it's separated in the beginning, but we're going to get a lot more overlap. And it's not just because Samantha leaves and comes back. Um, there was always probably the potential for this. I mean, Samantha was in the town. There was already the potential for violence, even if she was keeping herself to being on the outside of the town. And I thought it was interesting that it's like she has to kind of protect her turf when this other danger comes into the situation. Um, but yeah, I love the world building and the small town feel, from the newspapers to the characters to the rituals of small towns to the annoying people we all know in small towns that get on people's nerves, to all of it, even the suspicion. I thought it was just really just well built at the level of setting and atmosphere.
Yeah, to add to the idea there of atmosphere too, we had talked about in our previous episode when we were kind of outlining what makes cozy horror, and one of the things we had mentioned was like a lot of it seems to be like a seasonal thing, um, having that kind of autumnal feel to it, and I think this does that because it's not only this very cozy small town, but it's very clear from the drawings and stuff that it's set in the fall. You have the leaves changing colors and starting to fall to the ground, and everybody's wearing um, their little jackets and flannels. And I don't know, something about seeing a bear in a flannel is just really cute again. Um, despite what horrible things happen. But I also want to mention too that when you meet this cast of characters, there's also a really great friendship that we get between Samantha and her kind of longtime friend, which I know we'll talk about down the road too, but I think that helps. I mean, it sounds weird to say like humanizes her, and we're gonna make the connection constantly to Dexter because I feel like that's our cultural touchstone here. But one of the things that I think helps us connect to somebody who is a killer is not just like a killer who has rules, because Samantha does have rules that she sets out for herself. Um, Kind of in the same way that Dexter would. But I think the fact that she has this kind of long-time friendship that goes deeper than just her connection with the other people in town too, I think that's one of the strengths of the novel.
Well, and before we get away from it, I wanted to also kind of throw in to go back to what Mel was saying about the the danger living under the surface of small towns is something that I've always found interesting, and it really reminds me of David Lynch's Blue Velvet, which is something that where he very similarly explores the seedy underbelly of the small, perfect, pristine town, and um, that's probably about where the comparison ends to this novel. But I think thematically, it is a good touch point along with Dexter, just because of that exploration of, I mean, in this, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it looks like a perfect little small town, great place to live, all of that. But even there is the darkness underneath that is Samantha, and also this new killer that has shown up and is, threatening her safety and sanctuary there.
Well, Matt, I think one of the things that we should probably start talking about, and I guess this kind of transitions us from what you were talking about, and also Lisa. So Samantha has this friend in town. I think her name is Lola, and they've been friends for several decades. I think like 40 years or something. And her kid Nigel has come to help her, right, help take care of her as she's getting older. And so, even though Sam seems to have these acquaintanceships with everybody in the town, like everybody knows her and goes to her hardware store, she knows everybody, and it's important to her to protect this vibe. So she takes her, wanting to quiet those thoughts in her head and, let these impulses out elsewhere. She does have this friend, or the closest thing I think she says that one could call a friend. And it turns out when she starts her investigation into who is doing these murders, these really showy murders with messages and stuff, it's not, they don't have the same MO as her. She goes through some red herrings because in a mystery, you've got to have some false leads. And she kind of couches this as she's just trying to protect her town because it would be very easy for the information to get out about her violent tendencies through the investigation. And it turns out, spoiler alert, that it is Nigel, the person who came to town to help take care of his mom, is the one who is doing this. And a question that I had for you guys as I was thinking about this is we have two killers here with two different kinds of MO. Nigel says, if I remember correctly, at one point that he was doing this to kind of get her attention so they could be a team of sorts. But I I wondered if either it seems like to me that he's trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? Like compete with her or show off to her or horn in on her territory, if that makes sense. I mean, I think she even tells them at one point to go somewhere else and build his own kind of system. So, I mean, are we seeing like a serial killer with rules who's coming up against like chaos, or is it Nigel trying to kind of work his way in and create some sort of like, I don't know, like apprentice type relationship here? I don't know. I feel like Nigel is just pure chaos and mess, and that Samantha, even though she's a killer, is always trying to contain chaos. Um, and so that was kind of where I came down on that. But I was wondering what your all's take on this was, this kind of competing serial killer vibe we have going on here.
I kind of want to jump in and respond to your question there first. I and I'm glad that you brought this up, and sorry, listeners, for the spoiler, but we'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well. But the when I mentioned at the beginning and kind of my first impressions that this at times felt a little derivative, that would be one of the big points of it, is that the the beats of the plot here are have a lot in common with the first season and the first book of Dexter. Uh, Not everyone seems to be aware that Dexter began its life as a series of novels, but the first novel was very, very closely the basis for season one of the show. Lots of, I mean, there's a little bit of differences here and there, but I think you're exactly right. That was the tension that Dexter had in season one, and that's the tension that's going on here. Is this one particular killer who is very rules oriented as a means of survival? You know, like you don't kill too close to home because that will attract attention. I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to be executed. I don't want to be caught. I want to continue living my life and having this part of me, but to do that, I survive by these rules, and they are confronted by a similar killer who doesn't follow rules and is far more chaotic, or at least, even if they're not chaotic, they're not controllable and they're not predictable, in the same way that our protagonist, for lack of a better word, uh, is. And I agree. It's ambiguous about the full motivations for Nigel. Is he really wanting an apprenticeship? Is he really just trying to have this, like you said, one-upsmanship, like back and forth, almost kind of like contest? It's unclear, and I think it's open to interpretation for either way. I think you could make a case for either of those, but I think that central tension of, here's how I survive. I survive by following the rules, and now my order has been threatened and thrown asunder, and I've got to do something about it, because not only is, people that I know being killed, but this literally threatens my life and livelihood, because in searching for this killer, they may very well find me the killer. And they may find evidence of my crimes and all of that. So I guess that's a long way of saying I think the juxtaposition of order versus chaos is very much there in this story, um, from my view at least.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Matt. Anytime I think you have these kind of, like, I hate this term, but like a serial killer with a heart of gold type stories, the Dexter-esque um stories where our hero is the anti-hero. Like, our hero is the serial killer and we know they're doing bad things and we can't excuse them, the things that they're doing, even though we want to. It kind of puts you in a narrative trap where a couple of things have to happen. Um, I mean, yes, you do have to. I like this idea, and I can't remember now, Matt, if it was you or Mel who said this, but this idea of like a very ordered mind coming up against chaos, because that's one of the things that does stick out about like Dexter, for instance. And Matt, like you, I had read the books first, and then saw the show, or I can't remember if all the books had come out before the show, but I had definitely read the first book before I had watched the TV show. Um, and there's so much in there about, his code and how he can't break it, but also how he's building this life that is meant to be a cover for what he's doing, right? But as the series progresses, there is this there's this pull within him that's really interesting to watch of, is he a human who has these like dark needs, and he's just is doing what he has to keep them under control, or is he a killer who is like kind of wearing the human skin just so he can hide? And I feel like that's one of the things we see really well with Samantha, and that's why I had brought up like this friendship that she has in the book, because it's one of the things that I think does humanize her. Um, and I don't want to jump ahead a little bit, but I do want to talk about the, because I think this is really kind of, I don't know, it might illustrate better my jumbled thoughts here on this. But when Samantha goes into the woods and sees the non-human bears, like the real bears out in the woods, um, and they're fighting, and sees the blood, and she says something along the lines of, "This is where I belong," or "This is where we belong." I think she uses the term "we," which is really interesting because there's this idea in the book that's presented that somewhere along the way in the history of this world as it is presented, where some of the animals became civilized, and they were the ones, who learned to talk and learned, I guess, to feel shame over their naked bodies and wear clothes and form towns and have jobs and relationships and all the trappings of humanity. But then there were others who didn't evolve in that way and like stayed the animals that we understand. And so on some level, because Samantha doesn't have the dark past that like Dexter has, because it gets a bit repetitive by the time you're watching the entire series, plus like all the spinoffs, which get a bit exhausting. But he's constantly going back to the idea that he was born in blood, right? um that because of what happened to him when he was a child and what happened to his mother and what he witnessed, that's why he has this drive to kill. But what I thought was really interesting in this is that it almost seemed to be that Samantha recognized that like her desire to kill, her like bloodlust, comes from something much more primal within her. And that kind of complicates it a little bit, because as she goes to solve this mystery of who the other killer is, and obviously to like get the killer off her turf so that she isn't discovered, which she almost is because they accuse her of being the killer, and she has to go on the run. It's really kind of interesting because if is that animal not just acting also on instinct? And then her whole rule book kind of falls apart. I don't know. I thought that interaction of her watching the kind of quote unquote real bears and saying this is where we belong was fascinating.
Yeah, I was struck by that too, and I don't know what I can add, but when I was reading it, I thought I was like, when Nigel basically frames her for crimes, but they're actually her crimes. Like that's the problem she was worried about, is that someone's going to accidentally discover her, and Nigel basically pushes that along because she won't do what he wants her to do, and he wants to have the place to himself. And when she goes on the run, she dark night of the soul is not the correct term, I guess, because obviously she's at most worried about how she can't go home, because home is tremendously important to her, because it's that place that she actually uses the word cozy at one point to describe as the place that she tries to protect. But she kind of is like, she's thinking back on the people that she has killed, and she's having these there's a couple of them that she sees in the back seat and she sees at the restaurant, and she's almost like haunted. And I was thinking to myself, what's going on here? Are we not just supposed to like be kind of rooting for her as the protagonist, but also she's going to change. But she didn't change. You're right. She kind of doubles down on who she is. And it is when she watches the bears. And I was wondering the same thing. Is it like, oh, well, this is something that's inside me that is stronger or I have to act on, unlike other anthropomorphized animals? Is she saying that she identifies with the wild bears? Because like her method is not like the wild bears. Like they're fighting each other over food or territory, and she has all these rules. So I don't know. I thought it was interesting that we started out on a path of her maybe being haunted by what she did and thinking about it in a different way, to her almost doubling down on it. I mean, she again, I feel like I'm like the spoiler person over here. She uses her friendship because she tells Nigel the friendship, while that was her closest thing to a friend, it doesn't preclude her from using that friendship when she needed to do what she needed to do at the end of the book. So it's almost like she forsakes all connections other than just wanting to be in this place with these comfortable, familiar people. So I don't know, but I thought it was interesting. I thought the haunting kind of possibly being uh thinking about what she had done, but then doubling down on it was interesting. Though, like you, I don't know exactly what we're supposed to make of that, other than the fact that she maybe is coming to terms with who she is and that she can't change, maybe, and she has to go home. She has to go home. She has to go home and take back this place that means so much to her, regardless of what she has to sacrifice.
Well, and then we also have Lola's sickness too, which I think complicates that. Because I wonder how much we can actually trust Samantha when she says she's willing to sacrifice the 40-year friendship, um,
That's
in
true.
the
You're right.
end.
Yep.
Um, I don't know, it's just it's really, this story really is well done, I think the way it's laid out, and, just for putting in those little details that do, I think, complicate it. Because yes, that feels cold, that she wants to protect this place, even at the expense of like the person she's closest to. But then at the same time, I did kind of wonder, um, with Lola being sick, if that would have, if Lola had not been sick, would it have changed the outcome of it? And of course, we can't answer that. It's kind of, uh, it's kind of like the encounter with the bear. It's not offering that easy answer that, like, for instance, something like Dexter does, by saying, well, I'm this way because of my mother, what happened to her. That's not offered up to us. I mean, I think even having, because, and maybe I'm wrong, Lola and Nigel, they're mice. They're some sort of prey creature,
Think either mice or voles or something like that.
some sort of little, yeah. I'm just because I'm thinking like bears are so obviously predators, and that would be easy to lay on it. But I think making Nigel kind of the second killer feels like also that kind of goes against the thesis of, well, she's this way, Samantha is this way because it's her instinct, because there's a lot of talk about mother nature in this too. A lot of kind of speculation on mother nature, and especially when she's out in the woods, kind of doing what I think she would say she is intended to do, as a killer. But like, I don't know. Nigel doesn't strike me as, that's not in his nature to be like a vicious killer. So that also kind of complicates it in a really interesting way.
I think, I mean, and I'm don't know if I can psychologize a murderous mouse, but I think part of why Nigel does what he does, well, there's many reasons, I'm sure, his own and everything else, but there's that scene where he's trying to pick out a new victim and he's taking pictures of people and pretending while he does it that he's killing them. And somebody comes up to him and is talking to him about something that he did that they liked. They call him by the wrong name or something, and he like mutters, my name is Nigel, and then kind of like targets them or whatever with his camera. And there's conversations with him where people don't really seem to like, he doesn't like the fact that people aren't really paying attention to him, even though that helps him with his killing. And he it doesn't seem like he really wanted to come back and help his mom like he did, and he didn't. um and so I don't know, I wonder if, again, like, I guess we're playing into the different types of serial killers, quote unquote, that he's in it for, to get attention, to kind of maybe get back at people that he doesn't think are appreciating him enough, or that he's forgettable or something like that. Um, so yeah, but yeah, you're right. I don't know. Mice are prey animals, so I'm not sure. And now that I think about it, the other suspect that Samantha thinks is the killer is the pig that gets on everybody's nerves, and the cat. It takes her a while to get to Nigel.
I was definitely ready for the pig to go. The pig got on my nerves.
She was so annoying, especially when she parked and like just left her car in the middle of traffic to get coffee.
Yeah, it is kind of funny because she is a little bit of the small town Karen. The very like in time. I mean, I think she even has blonde, uh, a little blonde bob going on. But yeah, she was definitely the entitled, uh, small town woman. Yeah, so it again, that kind of does, even though she herself wasn't a killer, um, it kind of goes to that Dexter aspect of it, of, you're rooting a little bit for the killer to get rid of the annoying people. And it doesn't have the same effect when Nigel does it. Um, I think Nigel, you know, I mean, for lack of a better word, maybe does feel a bit mousy in his own life, like, he's just angry people aren't taking him seriously, or people don't see him for how he thinks he should be seen. Um, which I don't know, doesn't feel as fun to watch, um, as a killer with a code.
I think you're right, and I've been trying to put my finger on it, and I still don't think that I can. But there is something very unlikable about Nigel compared to Samantha, and obviously that's intentional because she's the protagonist, he's the antagonist. I mean, of course you have to root for the protagonist, or you're supposed to. And but I can't fully put my finger on what it is that, I mean, because essentially they are very similar in terms of, being serial killers. I guess part of it is that he is so haphazard with his killing. But I don't know. I it bothers me that I can't put my finger on what exactly it is about his personality that I like. I just don't like him, but I like her. Um, what do you all think about that aspect of things? Because I don't know. I thought I might be able to talk my way through it, but I can't.
I was just gonna say I get the same vibe from him, but I don't know that I could necessarily point to evidence in the text, because even when the garish, like the writing the messages and taunting the police murders are happening, we don't know it's him. So yeah, I don't know. There's just, yeah, I feel the same way, but I'm not sure I can explain why.
I think, I mean, part of it is obviously, the way we're introduced to the characters. I mean, we're introduced to Nigel rather quickly. Um, but we follow Samantha from the very beginning, and I think because Samantha is upfront with who she is, like with us, the reader, I think that helps. There's no pretense, there's no lying. And I mean, when you do look at Nigel, like with him with his camera, I mean, there's literally a lens between him and the world. Um, which, again, I don't want to read too deeply into that, but like I think there's something kind of artificial about how he portrays himself, and she feels much more authentic. Plus I think her going back to this idea of like order versus chaos, I think her desire to make everything neat and tidy from the very beginning lends itself to this like cozy horror that we've been talking about. And I think that is one of the things that endears her to us is there's a sense that she knows who she is and she's being honest with us, but she's also being restrained. I don't know. I just something about chopping up a body, burying it neatly in paint cans, and then coming home and taking a bubble bath. Um, all while saying, everything in its place, everything neat and tidy, makes it, I don't know, just it I don't know, it just endears me to her. I don't know if that's an acceptable reason why, but um for
Well,
me that was it.
I like what you said about the authenticity, because she is far more authentic than Nigel. Uh, and part of that is having access to her interior monologue versus not having his. But I have a feeling that if we did have access to his internal monologue, it wouldn't help. But I think, yeah, I do like that about the authenticity and that she's upfront, no bones about it. She knows what she is and she knows who she is. And she there's something about that that definitely I think is more endearing than Nigel. And I think you're onto something with him, like always like viewing the world through his camera. There's a deeper reading in there that I'm struggling to get to. But I think, something about his mediated existence. Um, I don't know if that has to do with his likability, but there's uh, grad students if listening, there's a paper in there. Go write that and submit it to our conference.
There's definitely a paper there. No, I like what both you guys are saying. And while you were talking, Lisa, I thought of how we also talked about the importance of relationships in cozies. And Sam has relationships with everybody in town. Like she has the one friend, but everybody knows her, everybody likes her. She gets along with everybody else. We have that whole montage at the beginning, like setting up her place in this town and how important it is. And that I think draws us to her in addition to being in her mind and everything else you guys are saying. Whereas we don't see, and not that you have to have all these social connections to not be a serial killer, but I think there's also the idea that Nigel kind of like doesn't want to be there and is disconnected. Um, and so I think that just kind of also is something else that endears us to Samantha as well, is that she has these connections and relationships, and that's part of what makes the mystery and the horror in the town cozy. Okay, so I think we've discussed Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees as much as we can. Listeners, I hope that you enjoyed the conversation. I hope that we caught you in time when we mentioned there were spoilers, just in case you wanted to go read it before you listen to the episode. But we didn't talk about everything in it, and there's so much that we talked about being ambiguous that I think there's a lot in this. I might read it again at some point and see if I can get even more out of it. I very much enjoyed this particular book. So that is our second overall cozy episode, but our first of the ones where we're talking about specific examples of cozy. This was a graphic novel. Next time, we're going to be talking about a television show. Just a little hint there, but we're continuing the kind of cozy fall winter vibes. We're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram, and we have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon. And we have merchandise available at our website, nofearcast.com. Or you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free and helps other listeners find us. Theme music by Nicholas Gasparini. and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new cozy episode.